Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hello, everyone. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Jason Williams, who is an emergency medicine trained doctor as well as a sports medicine doctor. And I want him to just tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, Keita, thank you for having me on. So I'm Jason Williams. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I grew up in the Dallas, Texas Metroplex. I did my undergraduate schooling at the University of Texas in Austin. And I went to UTMB, which is another University of Texas school for medical school. Then I decided I needed to branch out of the great state of Texas and decided to go do residency in New York City, which was just completely different from where I grew up and everything I knew. I did my training in emergency medicine. It's where I met my wife, well, my current wife, I should say. She was a student in one of the schools in New York, the medical schools in New York at the time. She's a pulmonary critical care doc now. And I've been working for the past 10 years in emergency medicine. And then about a year and a half ago, I did the non-traditional thing and went back to do a little bit more training and went into a year-long sports medicine fellowship. And now we live in a medium-sized city in the South and have two little girls and doing a little bit of both.
Thank you. Sounds like quite a journey. What made you decide to choose emergency medicine as your specialty?
Couple of reasons. I think I had a little bit of some favoritism bias toward it kind of growing up. I had two aunts who worked as ER nurses for a long time. And then I had an older cousin who was a physician's assistant in the emergency department, kind of when I was in undergrad. So I had a little, like I said, a little bias toward emergency medicine. But then at the same time, I grew up a big sports person and a gym rat. And when I was in medical school, it kind of came down to emergency medicine and orthopedics. The emergency medicine kind of lifestyle and craziness kind of just fit my personality. I also just really enjoyed helping people at some of their darkest times. And every time I thought about being in a clinic, I was like, I don't really like that idea, and of never having to take call. And when I got off of a shift, I got to go home. So those kinds of things just fit my personality a little bit more, and how I ended up in EM.
Sounds awesome. And tell me about your emergency medicine experience from transitioning from being a student to a resident and then an attending.
Yeah, so the first big jump was actually just moving from my comfort zone in Texas and going to New York City, which is just a completely different ballgame. So not only are you learning all kinds of new things in medicine and residency and working a lot, you obviously have to understand your new surroundings. But, went to a great program that was super accepting, and, great teachers and attendings who taught us all kinds of things of emergency medicine and life and medicine in general. I was in New York City for 3 years doing that residency. And then after I finished residency, I decided to come take a job. My first job was back in Texas, in Dallas. I actually worked for a large health system, took a job that is kind of known in the emergency medicine circles as a firefighter job. So basically I would work at 3 or 4 different hospitals in the same health system that our group kind of contracted with. And I would kind of fill in the needs, but I would get, my normal number of shifts a month or a full-time equivalent of that. And then I got to learn different hospitals and different types of practices. And then I kind of ended up settling on, after a couple of years, working in a large tertiary hospital with the academic program there, well, different academic programs, I should say. I just enjoyed being around residents and students and teaching them, and kind of also seeing a lot of the sickest people that would end up coming to us, the traumas and things of that nature that most emergency medicine doctors love taking care of. And that's kind of where my career went for most of the time. And I got opportunities to be a medical director of our health system in the event medicine department. So I took care of people when it came to sporting events and races in the area in Dallas. And then my wife was actually training at the time, and we ended up moving to Houston, and I ended up working at another tertiary hospital there, and a couple of freestanding emergency departments, which is another part of emergency medicine that we can talk about if you'd like.
Absolutely. That's very interesting, since you've worked in so many different kinds of emergency departments. Can you tell me a little bit about that and the landscape of the business side of EM?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you can choose to work in smaller departments from low rural hospitals out, in the country, or in big hospitals in the city, or anywhere in between. And a lot of states now have what are called freestanding emergency departments, which is basically a building or a space that's literally just an emergency department. Now, it could be associated with a hospital, or it could also be privately owned. In certain states, you can privately own some of these, like in Texas. But each one has its pluses and minuses. Obviously, if you work in a very small emergency department, you're having to transfer out a lot of patients. So you got to be really comfortable with taking care of all kinds of patients, doing a lot of things on your own because you don't have consultants and people to come help you. Then on the other end, if you work in a big tertiary hospital, you are the end-all be-all. Everything comes to you. So you will see the sickest patients, the transplants, all the large traumas, and then you're obviously taking in a lot of patients from outside hospitals. And then you have to work with a lot of consultants from every aspect of medicine. And oftentimes you're seeing a lot of these patients. You're the front door, even more so than in a smaller hospital. So they all have their pluses and minuses, and they're all run by different groups and things, and we can go into that more too as well.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to a medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. That's why more students than ever are turning to MCAT tutoring by Med School Coach. Our tutors are all 99th percentile scorers, have been through rigorous training, and can help raise your MCAT score by 12 points or more. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into med school, so why not get one-on-one tutoring from Med School Coach? Our expert team will create a custom program just for you and help you master MCAT content where you need the help most. You'll raise your MCAT score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach MCAT tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so emergency medicine, just like a lot of aspects of medicine, is basically moving toward the idea of you're kind of an employee or an independent contractor of a larger entity. I think the days of independent practitioners are kind of slowly dying away, but in emergency medicine, it's kind of been that way for a long time, even more so in 10 years than when I came out. Unfortunately, 10 years ago when I finished residency, I really didn't know any of this stuff, but you just don't get taught any of it. Even though I had great mentors and stuff, you practice on the medicine, you work on the medicine and trying to be a good doctor. And, you get out and you're just happy that you have a job and, you have an average compensation and you want, you want to work where you want to work. But, so for emergency medicine in general, there's usually two types of jobs. You can either work in a smaller democratic group where it's kind of like a private practice, and that group will contract with the hospital that they work for. Now, they could just have that contract with one hospital or maybe a couple of hospitals. Usually this group, kind of grew up in the area. The doctors all grew up in the area and they kind of work with that hospital, that community. They've been there for a while. The other big employment model is with a CMG, or a contract management group. That's how many emergency physicians are kind of employed nowadays. You basically work for this larger entity. They basically provide coverage to a lot of different hospitals, and they could be nationwide a lot of times. Those are the two big models that are out there.
Thank you for describing those models. They seem quite different in the way that the care is delivered and the structure, but there's a correct place for everyone. And I think some of the time students may consider certain programs or certain jobs after residency according to finances, which I think is a big topic right now in healthcare, as a lot of medical student debt is skyrocketing and people have a large loan burden. Would you suggest picking a residency in relation to finances, or how would you go about telling people how to choose something like that?
Yeah, so let me say, first off, I'm a firm believer in picking a residency or a specialty that you love, that you consider you would be a great fit for. I do not think you should ever pick a specialty purely on how much it pays you, because that will end up leading you toward burnout. And physician burnout is one of the biggest things that is going on in our circles nowadays. So I think it's super important that, we say all that, right away, because it's the number one decision tree. And after that, I do think that there should be some consideration when you're talking about, your debt burden and what specialty you're, going into. I think first off, if medical students can, understand the ideas of getting good habits when they're in medical school and early on when it comes to finances, their burden and things, it'll kind of help them down the road. But, if you have a large loan burden and you want to practice in one of the primary care specialties, you just have to understand that that's a large hole that you're trying to dig out of with a tiny shovel versus a dermatologist who can have a big forklift to try to help them get out of that hole. So it's important that the student understand that, from the get-go. And, if some of that takes into their consideration of where they're going, well, I think you're smarter for just knowing that up front instead of, just at the back end being like, oh, what did I do to myself?
I agree with that. And I completely appreciate that you said the first part where you said, do not pick a specialty according to compensation. Because when you think about it, you have to realize what makes you happy and what will make you sustainable and how you want to interact with patients and those type of things. And it's kind of like an investment in yourself as well as in your future in other non-monetary ways. And just doing what you love is important. And it can help kind of combat some of those feelings of burnout and other things that make people want to leave medicine in the future.
I agree. We're trying to be in this for the long game, not only for yourself, but for your future patients and society in general. And, if you're not doing it for the right reasons, then it's going to be hard to sustain that down the road.
You mentioned practicing good financial habits while you're in school. Can you give some examples of what you would suggest that students do and take into consideration?
Absolutely. And, personal finance, I think, is the most important part of that is it's personal. And you're okay with me sharing a little bit of, what I did and what I did wrong. I'm happy to do that as well. So I think the biggest thing that you got to understand, if you don't have, the ability to completely just pay outright for medical school, or if your parents aren't able to help you and you need to take loans, that's, understandable. That's what most medical students do. But you got to understand that you don't need to take out money, or you don't need to borrow money more than what you need. And, just because you have the money does not mean you need to go and spend it, because it's not yours, first off. Mm-hmm. And then there is this general rule amongst, the physician finance community and bloggers and podcasters who kind of dug into this a little bit more. And they kind of came up with this general idea that every dollar that you borrow, by the time you're done with residency and possibly fellowship, it's going to cost you 4 times more. So if you kind of go into it thinking that, you may have a better understanding. And when I talk about some of the mistakes I did, I went to a state school, which didn't cost me a lot. I had probably less than the average physician coming out of medical school debt, probably of around $150,000 or something like that. So it's usually the numbers they quote are like the average MD comes out with like $200,000. But I will tell you that I could have not spent all that money. I didn't need to. I could have had. 1 year of medical school, I went and lived on my own. I could have had roommates, I could have saved money in that regard. I couldn't have, I didn't need to spend all that money when I didn't need to. So it's the importance of, when I say about getting in good habits early on, will kind of help you down the road. Because obviously when you're a resident, you're not going to be making a lot of money. Then even when you're an attending, you'll still continue those good habits, that you won't, just because you're making more money, go and spend it all on something because of some delayed gratification that all of us suffer from, unfortunately.
At Med School Coach, we know that matching into the specialty of your choice and the residency program of your dreams has a dramatic impact on your career as a physician. And your USMLE score is the most important acceptance factor of all. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for USMLE tutoring. Our tutors are all 260 plus scorers and have been through rigorous training. Plus, the average student who uses Med School Coach tutoring raises their score by 23 to 55 points. There is an enormous amount of material you need to know for Step 1 and Step 2, and Med School Coach can help you be smart about how to study. We'll create a custom program just for you. Then, we'll help you master USMLE concepts where you need help most. You'll raise your USMLE score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach USMLE tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
I appreciate those comments. And I will say that like hindsight is definitely 2020 because I made a similar error in my med school thing. I had loans and no roommates. And while it was lovely to study in quietness in my nice apartment, probably should have took those roommates. So there are a lot of things people can look at in their own lives to figure out what you can and you cannot live with and what's negotiable and what's non-negotiable to help set yourself up for the future.
Yeah, that's the key, is setting yourself, your future self is going to thank you if you can do these things early on where, you're saving here or there. People don't like the dreaded B word, the budget, but it's, if you can do it early on, you won't even have to worry about it later on down the road. So that's the best thing about it.
Yes. Thank you so much for just diving in and being so open and honest about your experience and the things that you've learned throughout the way. What is one pearl that you would like to leave to pre-meds contemplating going to medical school and who are in the process of applying, or people who are currently in medical school as to how they should navigate going through the journey of becoming a doctor?
So I'm a big believer now, or it took me a while to understand that medicine is obviously a lifelong experience, and most of us who do this are obviously lifelong learners, and it's important to learn the medicine, but you can also continue to learn other things. But in the beginning, like I said, if you can develop these good habits even as a pre-med student and understand, when you're going to medical school, how much it's going to cost and what's the difference between one medical school and the other and how you can, use that down the road, it'll also make you a better physician because you're not worrying about the little things here or there. But the importance of, obviously doing well in school and getting good relationships with your mentors and stuff is always important. And nowadays, I think there's so many people who are blogging and podcasting and things that you can jump on, you can learn. There's nothing wrong with learning a little bit of extra while you're, a pre-med student or even a med student to kind of help yourself down the road besides the medicine.
Thank you. I totally agree with what you said earlier, where they do teach us the medicine, but not necessarily the business aspect and how to set yourself up. You did mention some sources where people can do that extra side education. Do you have any specific examples of what you've been reading to help think about that?
Yes. So I am a big fan of the White Coat Investor, Dr. Jim Dowley. He's actually a practicing emergency medicine physician. He started this website and podcast and blog, I think around 2011. And I mean, he's a great writer and he speaks on all kinds of topics. But it's a great starting point. He has a book that he wrote. It's the perfect book to start with. And I can say it's the book I started with when I kind of went on this personal finance journey for myself. But, he's got a community that you can kind of look into as well. But there are a lot of good books and resources out there that, you don't even have to pay for now. It's all free.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really appreciate you coming out. And again, we have Dr. Jason Williams here. If you have any comments or questions for follow-up, you can always reach out to us at the Med School Coach. And we're going to say bye for now and see you again next week.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.